I'm going to tell you something that might sound impossible right now, but I promise you, by the time we finish this conversation, you're going to see your entire life differently. You've been wondering why certain people walked away. You've been questioning God about why relationships that felt so right suddenly fell apart. You've been lying awake at night, replaying conversations, asking yourself what you did wrong. But what if I told you that God didn't remove those people to punish you? What if I told you that He removed them because they would have blocked the very breakthrough you've been praying for? What if the emptiness you feel right now isn't loss at all, but preparation? What if God is clearing your path because something so magnificent is coming that He needs you unencumbered, undistracted, and completely free? Stay with me, because what I'm about to share with you will change not just how you see your past, but how you walk into your future. You know, I've spent decades studying the principles of purpose and destiny, and one pattern emerges with absolute consistency. Right before a woman steps into her season of elevation, right before she walks into the fullness of what God created her to be, there is always a season of separation. Always. It's not random. It's not coincidence. And it's definitely not punishment. It's divine strategy. God knows that you cannot carry old relationships into new dimensions. He knows that certain people, no matter how much you love them, no matter how long you've known them, are simply not equipped for where you're going. And here's what most people miss. Those people aren't necessarily bad people. They're just not your people for the next season. Think about a butterfly for a moment. Before that butterfly can fly, it must leave the cocoon. The cocoon isn't evil. The cocoon served a purpose. The cocoon protected that creature during its transformation. But if the butterfly tries to stay in the cocoon after its wings have formed, that same cocoon that once protected it will now suffocate it. The butterfly must break free. It must leave behind what once felt like safety. And when it does, it doesn't fly back to the cocoon. It flies toward the sky. That's you right now. You're that butterfly, and God is saying it's time to fly. But you cannot fly if you're still trying to hold on to the cocoon. You see, the problem with most people is they want the promise without the process. They want the palace, but they don't want the prison. They want the throne, but they don't want the wilderness. Listen to me carefully. Every promise of God comes wrapped in a process that feels like a problem. And when you're in the middle of that process, you're going to be tempted to go back. You're going to remember Egypt. Not the slavery. Oh no, you'll forget about that. You'll remember the fish, the cucumbers, the garlic. Isn't it interesting how memory sanitizes suffering when the future demands sacrifice? The children of Israel did this. God delivered them with a mighty hand, split the Red Sea, drowned their enemies, gave them pillar of cloud by day and fire by night. But the moment things got difficult, the moment the process became uncomfortable, they wanted to go back. They actually said it would have been better for us to die in Egypt than to die in this wilderness. Think about that statement. They preferred familiar bondage to unfamiliar freedom. They chose the predictability of slavery over the uncertainty of destiny. And here's what breaks my heart. Many of you are making the same choice today. You're sitting in that dead-end job because it's familiar. You're staying in that toxic relationship because you're afraid of being alone. You're maintaining that lifestyle that's killing you slowly because change feels like death. But what you don't realize is that staying where you are is death. It's just death in installments. God never promised you comfort. He promised you purpose. He never promised you ease. He promised you effectiveness. He never promised you a problem-free life. He promised you a powerful life. And power is only revealed under pressure. Let me tell you something about pressure. A diamond is just coal that handled pressure exceptionally well. The difference between coal and diamond isn't the substance, it's the same carbon. The difference is what happened to it under pressure. One stayed on the surface, comfortable and undisturbed. The other went deep, got squeezed, got heated, got transformed into something so valuable that kings wear it. You see, pressure doesn't just reveal who you are, it reveals who you're capable of becoming. Most people spend their entire lives avoiding pressure. They run from conflict. They dodge difficult conversations. They quit when things get uncomfortable. They change jobs when the boss gets demanding. They leave relationships when things get challenging. They abandon their dreams the moment opposition shows up. But here's what they don't understand. The pressure isn't there to destroy you. The pressure is there to develop you. Think about a seed for a moment. When you plant a seed in the ground, what happens? It gets buried in darkness. It gets covered with dirt. It gets pressed down by the weight of the soil above it. And if that seed could talk, it would probably say, "This is terrible. I'm trapped. I'm in the dark. I'm under pressure." But you and I know something that seed doesn't know in that moment. We know that the very pressure that feels like it's crushing the seed is actually the exact condition required for it to crack open and release the life that's inside of it. The pressure isn't killing the seed. The pressure is birthing the tree. The same is true for you. That difficult season you're in right now, that's not your burial. That's your planting. That pressure at your job, that's not there to break you. That's there to develop skills in you that you'd never develop in a comfortable environment. That financial squeeze, that's not punishment. That's training you in resourcefulness, creativity, and faith. That relationship tension, that's not the end. That's refining your character, teaching you patience, communication, and unconditional love. Pressure is the womb of greatness. Every person you admire, every leader you respect, every success story you've ever heard, if you look closely enough, you'll find pressure in their past. You'll find a season where they were squeezed, stretched, tested, and tried. And it was in that pressure cooker that they became who they are today. Nelson Mandela didn't become a global icon of forgiveness and leadership in a palace. He became that man in a prison cell. 27 years of pressure forged a character so strong that it changed a nation. The question isn't whether you'll face pressure. You will. The question is, what will you become under it? Will you crumble into dust, or will you crystallize into something magnificent? You see, I've watched people my entire life respond to pressure in drastically different ways. Same situation, same intensity, completely different outcomes. And I discovered something profound. No, it's not the pressure that determines your outcome. It's your perspective of what the pressure is. What most people see pressure as punishment. They think God is angry with them. They think life is unfair. They internalize the stress, and they begin to question their worth, their calling, their very existence. Why is this happening to me? Becomes their daily anthem. And under that lens, under that interpretation, they begin to crack. Not because the pressure is too great, but because they've misunderstood its purpose. But there's another kind of person, rare but powerful. This person sees the same pressure and asks a different question: what is this preparing me for? They recognize that pressure is positional. You're being positioned for something greater than where you currently stand. The magnitude of your pressure is directly proportional to the magnitude of your assignment. Think about it. Nobody pressurizes a pebble. You don't take a grain of sand and subject it to intense heat and crushing weight. Why? Because there's nothing significant inside to extract. But when you find a lump of raw carbon, when you identify potential value, that's asterisk when you apply pressure, that's when you introduce heat. Because you know that with the right conditions you can transform that ordinary material into something extraordinary. God doesn't waste pressure on purposeless people. The very fact that you're under intense pressure right now is evidence that there's something valuable inside you worth extracting. The enemy doesn't attack empty warehouses. He doesn't waste ammunition on people who pose no threat to his kingdom. If your life has become a battlefield, congratulations, you've been identified as dangerous. Let me tell you something that might shock you. The very fact that you're facing opposition right now is proof that your assignment has value. God doesn't waste protection on empty vessels. He doesn't dispatch angels to guard people who are sitting idle in their comfort zones. When you decided to step into your purpose, you became a marked person. Not for destruction, but for distinction. The enemy studies the blueprints of heaven. He knows what God has deposited in you. He's seen the plans drawn up before the foundation of the world. And he's terrified. Think about this. Why would hell mobilize against you if you weren't carrying something powerful? Why would darkness organize resistance if your light wasn't bright enough to threaten its territory? The level of opposition you're facing is directly proportional to the level of impact you're designed to make. I've watched this pattern throughout history. Moses faced Pharaoh's resistance the moment he accepted his assignment to deliver a nation. David encountered Goliath when he stepped onto the battlefield of his destiny. Nehemiah faced mockery and threats the moment he began rebuilding walls. Jesus himself faced the most intense opposition in human history because he carried the most significant assignment ever given. The attacks you're experiencing aren't random. They're strategic. They're calculated attempts to stop you before you fully step into what God has prepared for you. Every discouragement is a targeted missile. Every setback is a carefully planned ambush. Every moment of doubt is a psychological warfare operation designed to make you abort your mission. But here's what the enemy didn't count on. Opposition doesn't disqualify you. It confirms you. Resistance doesn't mean you're on the wrong path. It means you're on the right one. When you understand this, everything changes. You stop asking God to remove the battle and start asking Him for the strategy to win it. You see, most people pray for the storm to pass. But the wise pray for the strength to walk through it. There's a fundamental difference between those two prayers. One is asking God to change your circumstances. The other is asking God to change you in the midst of your circumstances. And let me tell you something, God is far more interested in who you're becoming than He is in making you comfortable. I've watched this play out time and time again. Someone gets a vision from God. They get excited. They tell everybody about it. Then the first obstacle shows up and they're already looking for the exit. Why? Because they thought the vision was supposed to be easy. They thought God's favor meant smooth sailing. But that's not how this works. God's favor doesn't eliminate the fight, it equips you for it. Think about Joseph. God gave him a dream that one day his brothers would bow before him. That's a powerful vision. But between the dream and the palace was a pit, slavery, false accusation, and a prison cell. Now, if Joseph had judged God's promise by his circumstances, he would have concluded that God lied to him. But Joseph understood something profound. The resistance he was facing wasn't contradicting the promise, it was preparing him for it. You cannot lead at the level of a prime minister with the character of a slave. God had to develop in Joseph the integrity, the wisdom, the emotional maturity, and the spiritual depth that would qualify him to hold the position his dream promised. The pit didn't disqualify Joseph. It refined him. The prison didn't deny the prophecy. It prepared him for it. This is where most people lose the plot. They think the obstacle is God saying no, when actually it's God saying not yet, you're not ready. And if you're smart, instead of complaining about the delay, you'll ask yourself, what is this season trying to teach me? What character is being forged in me right now that I'm going to need later? Every level requires a new you. You cannot access your next season with your current character. Promotion always demands transformation. God is not cruel when He makes you wait. He's strategic. He's building something in you that's bigger than what you're asking Him for. You're praying for a business. He's building a business person. You're praying for a marriage. He's building a husband. He's building a wife. You're praying for a platform. He's building the integrity to sustain it. Most people want the blessing without the building. They want the crown without the crucible. But I'm telling you today, the delay is not denial. It's development. Think about Joseph again. 17 years old, has a dream from God, 13 years in the pit and the prison before he ever sees the palace. Why? Was God being mean? No. God was making him, because the 17-year-old Joseph who had the dream could never handle what the 30-year-old Joseph was about to receive. The dreamer had to become a deliverer. The boy had to become prime minister. And here's what I need you to understand. During those 13 years, Joseph never stopped growing. Even in the prison, he was practicing administration. He was managing Potiphar's house. He was interpreting dreams. God was giving him on-the-job training for a position that didn't even exist yet in his experience. You see, preparation is not passive. You don't just sit around waiting for your time. You prepare actively right where you are. You develop excellence in obscurity. You practice faithfulness with the little. You perfect your character when nobody's watching. Because I promise you, when your moment comes, it comes fast. One day Joseph was in prison. The next day he was standing before Pharaoh. One conversation changed everything. But that one conversation required 30 years of preparation. Your suddenly is coming. But suddenly is never sudden. It's the result of steady. It's the accumulation of all those hidden years. Those faithful moments. Those private disciplines that nobody saw, nobody celebrated, nobody applauded. When David stepped into the arena with Goliath, everyone thought it was sudden. But David had already killed the lion and the bear in private. The public victory was just a demonstration of private preparation. So wherever you are today, I'm telling you, steward this season. Stop despising the day of small beginnings. Stop being frustrated with the process. Because the truth is, God is not in a rush, but He's always on time. And there's a big difference between those two statements. When you're anxious, when you're pushing, when you're frustrated with where you are, you're operating in human time. But when you submit to the process, when you steward the season you're in with faithfulness and excellence, you're operating in kingdom time. And kingdom time always produces kingdom results. I've watched too many people abort their destiny because they couldn't handle the waiting room. They got impatient in the preparation phase. They looked at where they were and said, this isn't enough. This isn't impressive. This isn't what I signed up for. And so they abandoned the assignment God gave them in pursuit of something that looked more significant. But here's what they didn't understand. God doesn't measure significance the way we do. We measure it by visibility. God measures it by faithfulness. We measure it by how many people are watching. God measures it by whether we're doing what He told us to do. I remember early in my ministry, I was preaching to 12 people in a small room. 12. And some weeks it was 9. Some weeks it was 7. And I'd be lying if I told you I wasn't discouraged. I'd be lying if I said I didn't wonder, God, is this it? Is this all you have for me? But something in my spirit kept saying, preach to these 12 like you're preaching to 12,000. Pour into these few like they're a multitude. Give them your best, not your leftovers. And you know what I learned? Those 12 people became the foundation. They became the culture. They became the core of everything that came afterward. Because I didn't despise them, God multiplied them. Because I stewarded the small, He entrusted me with the large. That's the principle. What you make much of, God multiplies. But what you despise, you disqualify yourself from receiving more of. So let me ask you today, what are you despising? What are you minimizing? What season are you rushing through instead of stewarding? Because I want to tell you something that might shock you. Your wilderness season is not a mistake. It's not a detour. It's not God forgetting about you. The wilderness is the crucible where character is formed, where vision is clarified, where dependence on God becomes your daily bread. Moses didn't just pass through the wilderness. He was transformed in it. 40 years on the backside of the desert. 40 years tending sheep that weren't even his own. 40 years of silence, obscurity, anonymity. Can you imagine? The man who grew up in Pharaoh's palace, educated in all the wisdom of Egypt, positioned for greatness. Now he's leading animals through barren land. But here's what most people miss. God wasn't punishing Moses in the wilderness. He was preparing him. Because the Moses who ran from Egypt could never have led Israel out of Egypt. The Moses who acted in his own strength, who killed a man in anger, who tried to be a deliverer in his own power, that Moses needed to die in the wilderness. And a new Moses needed to emerge. A Moses who understood his own weakness. A Moses who had learned patience with stubborn sheep before he could lead stubborn people. A Moses who had memorized every trail, every water source, every danger in that desert. Because guess what? He'd be leading 2 million people through that same wilderness 40 years later. You see, God doesn't waste anything. Not your pain, not your waiting, not your setbacks, not your seasons of obscurity. He's always working, always preparing, always positioning. But here's the key. You've got to cooperate with the process. You've got to say yes to the wilderness. You've got to extract the lessons instead of just enduring the circumstances. Now I want you to understand something profound. The wilderness is not designed to destroy you. It's designed to develop you. There's a massive difference. Destruction tears down with no purpose. Development tears down to rebuild stronger. God is not in the business of wasting your pain. Every tear you've cried, every sleepless night you've endured, every moment you felt like giving up, it's all raw material for your reformation. Think about a sculptor. When Michelangelo looked at a block of marble, he didn't see a rock. He saw David trapped inside, and his job wasn't to create David. It was to remove everything that wasn't David. That's what the wilderness does. It chips away at your false identity, your pretenses, your ego, your dependencies, until what's left is the real you. The you that God always intended. But here's where most people miss it. They think the wilderness is about getting out. God, just get me through this. Just get me out of this situation. And I understand that cry. I've prayed it myself. But the wilderness isn't primarily about getting out. It's about getting asterisk through asterisk. There's a difference. Getting out is about escape. Getting through is about transformation. You can get out of the wilderness and still carry wilderness thinking. You can leave Egypt but still have Egypt in you. The question isn't just when will this end. The question is, what am I becoming? You see, God is more interested in your character than your comfort. He's more concerned with who you're becoming than where you're going. Because ultimately where you're going demands who you're becoming. The palace requires preparation. The throne requires training. The promise requires process. Let me say this to somebody, you're not stuck, you're being strategically positioned. What looks like a delay is actually divine design. What feels like a detour is actually the direct route to your destiny. You think you're wandering, but you're actually being led. Every step, even the painful ones, is calculated for your development. You see, God doesn't waste experiences. He doesn't allow random chaos to derail His plan for your life. Every person you've encountered, every door that slammed shut, every betrayal, every disappointment, they're all part of the curriculum. You're not just living, you're learning. You're not just surviving, you're being shaped. Think about Joseph again for a moment. When his brothers threw him in that pit, do you think God was surprised? When Potiphar's wife lied about him, do you think God lost control of the narrative? When he sat forgotten in prison for years, do you think God had moved on to someone else? No. God was orchestrating. He was positioning. He was preparing Joseph for a palace through a prison. You can't lead a nation if you've never been betrayed. You can't manage abundance if you've never experienced lack. You can't comfort others in their darkest hour if you've never sat in darkness yourself. The very thing you're crying about today is building the credibility you'll need tomorrow. Your mess is becoming your message. Your test is becoming your testimony. I need you to understand something profound. You are not behind schedule. I don't care what age you are or what you haven't accomplished yet. God's timing is not early, and it's not late. It's exact. Abraham waited decades. Moses was 80 when his assignment truly began. David was anointed as a teenager, but didn't wear the crown until he was a man. The gap between promise and fulfillment is not emptiness. It's preparation. What if I told you that delay is not denial? What if I told you that the waiting period is the most critical phase of your development? Seeds don't grow overnight. Athletes don't peak in a week. Leaders aren't forged in comfort. There's a process, and you cannot microwave maturity. You cannot rush readiness. Right now, in this season that feels suspended, God is doing something in you that He cannot do through you until it's complete. He's developing character that matches your calling. He's building capacity for the weight of your destiny. He's removing the parts of you that would sabotage your success. This isn't wasted time. This is sacred preparation. God is preparing you to carry what you've been praying for. You see, most people want the blessing, but they're not ready for the weight of it. They want the promotion, but their character can't sustain that level of responsibility. They want the influence, but their integrity hasn't been tested enough to handle that platform. They want the relationship, but they haven't healed from the wounds that would poison it. So God says, I'm going to delay the delivery until you're ready to maintain it. This is wisdom. This is love. I've watched people get exactly what they wanted before they were ready, and it destroyed them. The money came before the maturity, and they lost it all. The opportunity came before the discipline, and they couldn't sustain it. The relationship came before the healing, and it fell apart. Premature blessing becomes a curse when you're not prepared to steward it. Let me take you deeper into this mystery of preparation. Every great leader in Scripture went through a process that seemed longer than necessary. Joseph didn't go straight from the dream to the palace. There was the pit. There was Potiphar's house. There was the false accusation. There was the prison. 13 years of preparation for a dream he received as a teenager. Why? Because the dream was about more than Joseph. It was about saving nations. And you can't trust someone with nations if they haven't been tested in the small places first. Moses spent 40 years in the palace learning to be somebody, then 40 years in the desert learning to be nobody, before God could use him to deliver somebody. David was anointed king as a boy, but didn't wear the crown until he was 30. Years of running, hiding, leading a band of broken men in caves. Why the delay? Because God was building in him the heart of a shepherd king, someone who would lead God's people with both strength and compassion. The pattern is clear. The greater the assignment, the longer the preparation. And here's what I need you to understand. During this season, God isn't just removing things from you. He's adding things to you. He's building capacity. He's developing your spiritual muscles. He's teaching you patience, perseverance, faith, wisdom, discernment. You're not the same person you were when this season started. And that's the beautiful paradox of waiting. You think you're standing still, but in reality you're moving forward in ways you can't even measure. You're being transformed from the inside out. The cocoon looks like confinement, but it's actually the place of metamorphosis. I remember when I was a young man, desperately wanting to step into ministry. I had the passion, I had the fire, I had the vision, but the doors kept closing, and I would cry out to God, Lord, I'm ready, use me. And you know what he was saying? Not yet, you're not ready. You think you're ready, but I see what you don't see. I see the pride that needs to be broken. I see the character that needs to be developed. I see the discipline that needs to be established. And thank God he made me wait. Because if I had gotten what I wanted when I wanted it, I would have destroyed it. I didn't have the capacity then for what I have now. The blessing would have crushed me because the character wasn't there to carry it. You see, God is not just interested in giving you the promise. He's interested in making you the kind of person who can sustain the promise. There's a difference between receiving a blessing and maintaining a blessing. Many people can receive, few can sustain. And the difference is character. The difference is maturity. The difference is developed capacity. Think about lottery winners. Most of them lose everything within a few years. Why? They got wealth without the character to manage it. They got the blessing without the preparation. And so the very thing that should have elevated them destroyed them. God loves you too much to do that to you. So he makes you wait. He keeps you in the wilderness. He keeps you in obscurity. He keeps you in the testing place until you're not just ready for the blessing, you're ready to be the blessing. Until you're not just prepared to receive, you're prepared to steward, to multiply, to pass on to the next generation. And here's what I need you to understand. Every single day of waiting is a day of qualification. You're earning credentials in the invisible realm. You're building a track record with God. He's watching how you handle the small. He's watching how you respond when nobody's watching. He's watching your faithfulness in secret, because that determines what he can trust you with in public. Because here's what most people miss. Promotion doesn't come from man. Elevation doesn't come from your connections or your networking or your manipulation. The scripture says promotion comes from the Lord. He's the one who puts down one and raises up another. He's the one who determines when you're ready. And the beautiful thing about God is that when he promotes you, nobody can demote you. When he opens a door, no man can shut it. When he sets you in position, you don't have to fight to keep it, because he's the one who ordained it. But if you try to promote yourself before your time, if you manipulate your way into a position you're not ready for, you'll spend all your energy trying to maintain something you're not mature enough to manage. You'll be like Saul wearing David's armor. It doesn't fit, it's too heavy, and you can't move in it. I've watched people claw their way to the top only to crash spectacularly because they arrived before their character could support their position. They had the talent, but not the temperament. They had the gift, but not the grace. They had the platform, but not the preparation. And when the pressure came, when the test arrived, when the challenge presented itself, they crumbled. Not because they weren't gifted enough, but because they weren't developed enough. Their roots weren't deep enough to sustain the weight of the fruit they wanted to bear. This is why God is so intentional about process. He's not trying to frustrate you with delays. He's trying to save you from destruction. Every season of waiting is actually a season of strengthening. Every moment of hiddenness is actually a moment of building capacity. Think about Jesus himself. The Son of God spent 30 years in obscurity before 3 years of ministry. 30 years of preparation for 3 years of manifestation. 30 years of character development before the miracles began. If the Son of God needed 3 decades of development before his public assignment, why do we think we should be exempt from the process? Think about Moses. Here was a man called to deliver a nation, but God didn't send him the moment he felt compassion for his people. Moses was 40 years old when he tried to deliver Israel in his own strength, his own way, his own timing. He saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew and acted impulsively. He killed the oppressor and buried him in the sand. That was Moses saying, I'm ready now. I see the need, I feel the call, I have the passion. But God said, you're not ready. And Moses spent the next 40 years on the backside of the desert, tending sheep that weren't even his own. 40 years of obscurity. 40 years of character refinement. 40 years learning patience, humility, and dependence on God rather than his Egyptian education and royal privilege. You see, the Moses who ran from Egypt at 40 couldn't have led 2 million people through the wilderness. He was still operating in his own strength, his own wisdom, his own agenda. The burning bush didn't happen until Moses was 80 years old, until he had been transformed from a prince who knew everything into a shepherd who knew nothing except God's faithfulness. The preparation season stripped away everything Moses was relying on, except God himself. That's what preparation does. It removes your confidence in your credentials and builds your confidence in your Creator. It takes away your dependence on your degrees and develops your dependence on divine direction. I've watched so many people become frustrated because they're anointed, but not appointed yet. They have the gift, but not the assignment. They have the potential, but not the platform. And they cannot understand why God is making them wait. But God is never late, and He's never wasting your time. Every season of waiting is actually a season of preparation. Every moment of hiddenness is character formation. Every period of seeming inactivity is divine development. The world celebrates the overnight success, but heaven knows there's no such thing. What looks like sudden breakthrough to others has been years of secret preparation to you. What appears to be instant favor has been decades of faithful obscurity. The tree that grows fastest falls first in the storm. The fruit that ripens too quickly rots before harvest. Now here's where most people stumble. They think that because they've been faithful in private, God owes them a public platform. They think the season of preparation entitles them to immediate recognition. But that's not how the kingdom operates. You see, there's a massive difference between being ready and being ripe. An apple can be fully formed, fully grown, but if you pick it before its time, it's bitter. It lacks sweetness. It cannot fulfill its purpose. The apple doesn't complain while it hangs on the tree. It doesn't look at the apples that fell yesterday and say, what about me? I've been here longer. No. It stays connected to the branch, drawing from the vine, allowing the sun to do its work, trusting the process that it cannot see but can only experience. Your preparation isn't complete just because you feel ready. Your preparation is complete when the Master says it is complete. And sometimes that requires one more winter, one more pruning, one more season of what feels like silence. I've watched leaders emerge too early, thrust into positions they lobbied for rather than positions they were called to. And I've watched them crumble, not because they lacked talent. They had plenty of that. Not because they lacked opportunity. They had manufactured that themselves. They crumbled because their roots hadn't gone deep enough. Their character hadn't been tested long enough. Their dependence on God hadn't been established firmly enough. When you promote yourself, you have to sustain yourself. When God promotes you, He sustains you. That's the critical distinction. Self-promotion comes with self-responsibility. Divine promotion comes with divine backing. And trust me, you want God holding you up when the storms come, because they will come. Visibility brings vulnerability. Influence brings opposition. Every level of anointing attracts a new level of warfare. Joseph knew this. By the time Pharaoh's dream needed interpreting, Joseph wasn't anxious anymore. He wasn't desperate. He wasn't even surprised. He had become so accustomed to God's presence in the pit and the prison that he could stand before power without being intimidated by it. He had learned to interpret dreams for a cupbearer with nobody watching. So when it was time to interpret dreams for a king with everyone watching, it was simply another day of faithfulness. The principle here is profound. Public victories are always built on private discipline. What you do when nobody's watching determines what you can do when everybody's watching. Joseph didn't suddenly become skilled at dream interpretation when he stood before Pharaoh. He had been honing that gift in obscurity, using it to serve prisoners who had no power to promote him, no influence to advance his cause. This is where most people miss their moment. They're waiting for the big stage to start performing, but they don't realize the big stage only comes to those who've been faithful on the small stage. You see, God doesn't give you the palace until He knows you can handle the pit. He doesn't give you the platform until He knows you can handle the prison. The promotion always comes after the proving. And notice something else. Joseph never used his gift for self-promotion. He could have walked around the prison saying, "I interpret dreams. I'm gifted. I'm special." But instead he simply said, "Do not interpretations belong to God?" He understood something that many gifted people never learn. Your gift is not about you. It's about service. It's about the people you're called to help. It's about glorifying the one who gave you the gift in the first place. When you understand this principle, you stop protecting your gift and start investing it. You stop hoarding it for the right opportunity and start using it wherever you are. Because here's the truth. There is no such thing as an insignificant opportunity to serve. The cupbearer seemed insignificant, but he was the connection to Pharaoh. The pit seemed like a waste, but it was preparation for the palace. Nothing is wasted in God's economy. Everything is preparation. Joseph's brothers meant to destroy him, but they positioned him. The Ishmaelites meant to profit from him, but they transported him. Potiphar's wife meant to seduce him, but she tested him. The false accusation meant to disgrace him, but it placed him. Every step that looked like a setback was actually a setup. That's why Joseph could look back and say to his brothers, "You meant it for evil, but God meant it for good." He understood something profound. Purpose reframes everything. When you know why you exist, you can endure what others cannot. When you know your assignment is bigger than your circumstances, you stop being a victim and start being a student. The prison wasn't punishment, it was preparation. God was upgrading Joseph's skills, expanding his network, refining his character. He was learning administration, leadership under pressure, how to manage people in crisis. He was being trained for a throne in a dungeon. And here's what most people miss. Joseph didn't waste his waiting season complaining. He served. He interpreted dreams. He made himself useful right where he was. You see, your current position is your classroom. Don't despise the place of preparation. Don't rush the process. God is developing something in you that the next level will require. You can't handle the palace with a slave mentality. You can't manage promotion with a victim mindset. The wilderness isn't your enemy. It's your university. I want you to catch this. Joseph spent 13 years between the pit and the palace. 13 years. Most people would have quit after 13 months. They would have grown bitter, resentful, angry at God. But Joseph kept his integrity. He kept his faith. He kept serving excellence into everything he touched. Why? Because he remembered the dream. Your dream is your anchor in the storm. When everything around you says give up, the dream says hold on. When circumstances scream failure, the dream whispers destiny. When people abandon you, the dream reminds you that God is faithful. The dream doesn't just show you your future. It sustains you through your journey. And then came the moment. Pharaoh had a dream. Nobody could interpret it. And suddenly somebody remembered Joseph. Isn't it amazing how God sets up your opportunities? For 2 years, the butler forgot about him. But when God's timing arrived, one memory changed everything. One conversation opened the prison door. One divine connection catapulted Joseph from prisoner to prime minister in a single day. You see, God doesn't just deliver you, He promotes you. He doesn't just rescue you from the pit. He positions you for the palace. And the length of your imprisonment often corresponds to the magnitude of your assignment. Joseph wasn't being punished in that prison. He was being prepared. Every injustice he endured was developing the character he would need to manage the wealth of nations. Every false accusation was teaching him how to handle power without abusing it. Every lonely night was building the spiritual strength he would need to remain humble when everyone bowed before him. Here's what most people miss. Joseph's promotion wasn't a reward for his suffering. It was the fulfillment of his prophetic dream. God hadn't forgotten the vision he gave that 17-year-old boy. He was simply waiting for the boy to become the man who could handle what the dream promised. And when the moment came, notice this carefully. Joseph didn't have to manipulate, negotiate, or campaign for position. He didn't send his resume to Pharaoh. He didn't network his way into the palace. He didn't compromise his integrity to climb the ladder. He simply remained faithful in obscurity until God opened a door no man could shut. That's the pattern of divine promotion. You don't chase it, you qualify for it. You don't force it, you prepare for it. You don't announce it, you walk into it when heaven says now. I want you to hear this. Your current position is not your final destination. Where you are right now is simply where you're being prepared for where you're going. The people who overlooked you, the opportunities that passed you by, the doors that slammed in your face, none of that was rejection. It was redirection. God was protecting you from promotions you weren't ready for. He was shielding you from positions that would have destroyed you. He was saving the best assignments for the best version of you. And just like Joseph, you're going to look back one day and realize that everything, the betrayal, the injustice, the delays, the disappointments, everything was working together to position you for a purpose bigger than your personal comfort. See, this is where most people miss the divine strategy. They're so focused on what they're going through that they can't see what they're growing through. They're so consumed with the pain of the present that they can't perceive the preparation taking place. But I want you to understand something today. Your setback is not a step back. It's a setup for a comeback that will leave people speechless. You know what I've discovered? The greatest danger to your destiny isn't opposition. It's premature promotion. Think about that for a moment. If God had answered every prayer you prayed 5 years ago, you'd be managing responsibilities you weren't ready to carry. You'd be handling relationships you weren't mature enough to maintain. You'd be occupying positions that would have exposed weaknesses you hadn't yet strengthened. God loves you too much to let you have something before you're ready for it. Because when success comes before character, destruction is inevitable. When prominence comes before preparation, disaster is unavoidable. This is why delay is not denial, it's development. And the longer the preparation, the greater the assignment. Let me take you to another powerful example. Moses spent 40 years in Pharaoh's palace learning leadership and administration. Then God sent him to the backside of the desert for another 40 years to unlearn his pride and learn humility. 80 years of preparation for 40 years of purpose. Most people would say, God, that's inefficient. That's wasteful. Why not use him at 40 instead of 80? But God doesn't operate on your schedule. He operates on his strategy. Moses at 40 was educated but arrogant. He tried to deliver Israel through violence and human effort, and he failed spectacularly. But Moses at 80, he was broken, humble, and completely dependent on God. And that's the man who could handle the glory, lead millions, and write the first 5 books of Scripture. Your wilderness isn't punishment. It's preparation. Your desert isn't abandonment. It's assignment. God is doing in you what he needs to do through you. He's building character in private so he can trust you with influence in public. He's crushing your ego in obscurity so he can elevate your purpose in visibility. And here's what you need to know. The weight of your assignment determines the depth of your preparation. That's why Moses spent 40 years in the wilderness before he could lead millions out of Egypt. That's why Joseph spent 13 years in slavery and prison before he became prime minister. That's why David fought bears and lions in obscurity before he faced Goliath in public. God doesn't skip steps. He doesn't shortcut the process. He's more interested in who you're becoming than what you're achieving. And I want to tell you something that might challenge you. God is not impressed with your resume. He's not moved by your credentials. He's not swayed by your portfolio or your pedigree. What captures his attention is the condition of your heart. What moves him is your willingness to be broken, molded, and shaped in the hidden place where no one sees. No one applauds, no one validates. Because here's the reality. Public success without private preparation produces spiritual casualties. When promotion comes before maturity, when platform precedes character, When visibility outpaces integrity, you end up with influence you can't sustain, authority you can't handle, and assignments you can't complete. The graveyard of destiny is filled with people who got what they wanted before they became who they needed to be. So when you feel forgotten, I need you to understand something. You're not being overlooked. You're being overseen. When you feel stuck, you're not being delayed. You're being developed. When you feel like nothing's happening, everything is happening beneath the surface. God is doing deep work that the shallow crowd will never understand. He's installing foundations that will hold the weight of the future He's planned for you. And let me tell you what happens in this season of preparation that makes it so valuable. In the waiting, you learn dependence. In the silence, you learn to hear His voice. In the obscurity, you learn that His approval is enough. In the delay, you learn patience. In the process, you learn trust. These aren't obstacles to your destiny. They're the curriculum of your becoming. This is where kings are made, where leaders are forged, where history makers are prepared. Joseph didn't know it in the prison, but the Pharaoh was having a dream. The butler didn't know it when he forgot Joseph, but God was setting up the timing. You see, if Joseph had been released when the butler first got out, he would have missed the Pharaoh's dream. He would have been released too early, promoted before his season, elevated before his character could sustain the height. God's delays are not God's denials. They're God's development programs. The prison wasn't a detour, it was the direct route. Every day Joseph spent there was another day of preparation, another layer of humility, another degree of dependence on God. And when the moment finally came, when Pharaoh had a dream that no one could interpret, there was only one man in all of Egypt who was ready. Not the wisest magician, not the most educated counselor, but a Hebrew slave who had learned to hear God's voice in a dungeon. Notice something powerful. Joseph didn't come out of prison bitter. He came out better. He didn't blame God for the delay. He trusted God through the process. And when he stood before Pharaoh, he didn't take credit for his gift. He said, "It is not in me." God will give Pharaoh an answer. That's the spirit of a man who has been processed properly. You know what happened next? One dream, one interpretation. And Joseph went from prisoner to prime minister in a single day. Not because he manipulated his way there, not because he networked with the right people, but because he was faithful in the hidden place. And God promoted him in the public place. 30 years old, second in command of the most powerful nation on earth, managing the resources of an empire, saving nations from famine, and most importantly, positioned to save his own family, the very brothers who betrayed him, from starvation. Can you see it now? The pit was necessary for the palace. The prison was required for the promotion. The rejection was essential for the redemption. Every piece of pain had a purpose. Every moment of suffering was an investment in his future. This is why you must never question the wilderness seasons. The very experience you want to escape from is the crucible forming your character for your ultimate assignment. Jesus wasn't just wandering aimlessly in that desert for 40 days. He was being positioned. He was being prepared. The temptation wasn't a distraction from his purpose. It was preparation for his purpose. You see, friend, the enemy never wastes his ammunition on people who don't matter. Satan didn't show up in the wilderness because Jesus was irrelevant. He showed up because he recognized the threat. The magnitude of the attack is often proportional to the magnitude of your assignment. When hell targets you with its fiercest opposition, it's because heaven has marked you for significant deployment. And notice this carefully. Jesus could have called legions of angels to his defense at any moment. He possessed the power to end his suffering instantly. But power under control is called discipline. Authority without exercise is called strategy. He chose restraint because he understood that some victories can only be won through surrender. The cross wasn't plan B. It was always the plan. From the foundation of the world, before time began, the Lamb was slain in the purposes of God. Every prophecy pointed to it. Every sacrifice foreshadowed it. Every promise required it. What looked like humanity's darkest hour was actually divinity's finest moment. Think about this paradox. Jesus had to lose everything to gain everything. He had to be stripped so that we could be clothed. He had to be rejected so that we could be accepted. He had to descend so that we could ascend. He became sin so that we could become righteousness. He tasted death so that we could taste life. This is the economy of the kingdom: gain through loss, strength through weakness, exaltation through humility. It defies human logic because it operates on divine wisdom. Your mind wants to avoid pain, but your purpose often requires it. Your flesh wants comfort, but your calling demands crucifixion. And here's what most people miss. Jesus wasn't just dying for you. He was demonstrating the pathway to you. He was modeling the pattern of transformation. He was showing you that resurrection always requires a tomb, that breakthrough always requires a breaking, that new life always requires the death of the old. And this is why so many people stay stuck, because they're waiting for a resurrection without being willing to enter the tomb. They want the glory without the crucifixion. They want the crown without the cross. They want Easter Sunday without Good Friday. But let me tell you something that will revolutionize your understanding. God is not intimidated by your death. He's not panicked by your endings. He's not worried about your losses, because He specializes in resurrection. His greatest miracles don't happen in life. They happen after death. Think about it. When did Jesus perform His most powerful miracle? Not when He healed the sick. Not when He fed the 5,000. Not even when He walked on water. His most powerful miracle was His own resurrection. And that only happened because He was willing to die. You see, resurrection power is only available to those who have died. New life is only available to those who have surrendered the old. The phoenix doesn't rise while it's still flying. It rises from the ashes of its own death. And here's what most people miss. Jesus didn't just die physically. He died to His own will. In the Garden of Gethsemane, when He prayed, "Not my will but yours be done," that was the real death. The cross was simply the physical manifestation of a spiritual surrender that had already taken place in His heart. This is the death God is calling you to. Not physical death, but death to your own agenda, death to your own timing, death to your need to control outcomes, death to your fear of what people will think, death to your attachment to comfort and security. Because here's the truth. The caterpillar doesn't become a butterfly by trying harder to be a better caterpillar. It enters the darkness of the cocoon. It literally dissolves. Scientists tell us that inside that cocoon, the caterpillar's body breaks down into a liquid substance. Complete dissolution. Total death of the old form. And yet encoded within that liquid are cells called imaginal discs. These cells carry the blueprint of the butterfly. And from that death, from that complete surrender of the old structure, emerges something that can fly. You are in the cocoon right now. And what feels like death is actually transformation. What looks like the end is actually the beginning. What seems like failure is actually the setup for your greatest flight. Your darkest moment isn't the end of your story. It's the turning point. That season where nothing made sense, where you questioned everything, where you felt abandoned and alone. That was your cocoon. And just like the butterfly, you had no idea what God was building inside you during that time. I've learned something profound about transformation. It happens in the dark. Seeds don't grow under bright lights. They grow underground. Photographs don't develop in the light. They develop in dark rooms. Character isn't formed on the mountaintop. It's forged in the valley. When you're in that dark place, you think God has forgotten you. You wonder if your prayers are even reaching heaven. You look around and see others prospering while you're struggling, and you begin to question your purpose. But what you can't see is that God is doing His deepest work during your darkest hour. The butterfly doesn't know it's becoming a butterfly. While it's breaking down in that cocoon, it probably thinks it's dying. But dying is exactly what needs to happen. The caterpillar you used to be has to die, so the butterfly you were created to be can emerge. Your old identity has to die. Your limited thinking has to die. Your small dreams have to die. Your dependencies have to die. Your fear has to die. Everything that kept you crawling when you were designed to fly, it all has to die in the cocoon. And here's what makes this process so painful. You mourn the loss of who you used to be. even though who you're becoming is infinitely greater. You miss the familiar, even though the familiar was keeping you trapped. You want to go back to crawling because flying requires a level of trust you've never had to exercise before. But listen to me. You cannot go back. The caterpillar that enters the cocoon cannot exit as a caterpillar. Transformation is irreversible. Once you've been touched by God's refining fire, once you've experienced His metamorphosis, you can never return to what you were. The old structure has been dissolved. The new form is emerging. And I want you to understand something powerful today. This transformation makes you dangerous to the kingdom of darkness. When you're comfortable, when you're complacent, when you're still clinging to your old ways, the enemy isn't worried about you. But when you've been through the fire, when you've allowed God to refine you, when you've embraced the process of becoming who you were always meant to be, now you're a threat. The caterpillar was harmless. It crawled on the ground, limited in its scope, bound by its perspective. But the butterfly can soar. It can cross barriers the caterpillar never imagined. It can see from heights the caterpillar never knew existed. And that's what happens when you allow transformation to complete its work in your life. You see, there's a reason the enemy fights so hard to keep you in your cocoon of comfort. There's a reason he whispers lies during your process. This is too hard. You're not going to make it. Just go back to what you knew. Because he knows that once you emerge, once you spread those wings, once you discover what you're truly capable of in God, you become unstoppable. I'm talking to someone right now who's been in a season of intense pressure. You felt squeezed. You felt like everything familiar is being stripped away. And you've been asking God, why? Why is this happening to me? Let me tell you why. Because you're being prepared for a dimension of purpose you couldn't fulfill in your old form. The assignment waiting for you requires the new you, not the old you. Think about this. Gold doesn't complain about the fire. Why? Because the fire isn't destroying the gold. It's revealing the gold. All that heat does is burn away the impurities, the dross, the things that were never supposed to be part of the gold in the first place. And when the goldsmith looks into that molten gold and sees his own reflection clearly, that's when he knows the refining is complete. God is looking for His reflection in you. He's looking for His character, His nature, His glory to shine through you without distortion. And sometimes the only way to remove the distortion is through the fire. The fire doesn't just purify. It reveals. It shows you who you really are when everything else is stripped away. When your reputation is gone. When your comfort is removed. When your security is threatened. What remains? That's the real you. That's what God is refining. I've watched people go through financial collapse, and it revealed whether their faith was in God or in their bank account. I've seen marriages go through storms that revealed whether love was a feeling or a decision. I've witnessed leaders face opposition that revealed whether their ministry was about God's glory or their own platform. The fire is a revealer of truth. And here's the challenging part. Sometimes what it reveals isn't pretty. Sometimes you discover that your motives weren't as pure as you thought. Sometimes you realize that your faith was thinner than you believed. Sometimes you find that your love had conditions attached. But don't despair when the fire reveals your weaknesses. That's exactly what it's supposed to do. You cannot fix what you don't acknowledge. You cannot heal what you won't expose. The fire brings everything to the surface so that God can deal with it. Think about gold again. When gold is heated, the impurities don't disappear. They rise to the top. They become visible. The refiner then skims them off. If the impurities stayed hidden in the gold, they could never be removed. The heat forces them to reveal themselves. Your trial is forcing things to the surface. Anger you didn't know you had. Fear you've been suppressing. Pride you've been hiding. Unforgiveness you've been nursing. The fire isn't creating these things, it's revealing them so they can be removed. And this is where many people make a critical mistake. When the fire reveals their impurities, they get discouraged and quit. They say, I must not be a real Christian. Look at all this ugliness in me. No, the fact that it's being revealed means God is working. The refining process has begun. The impurity in the gold doesn't surprise the refiner. He expected it. That's why he applied the heat in the first place. Your struggle doesn't surprise God. Your weakness doesn't shock him. He knew it was there and he's bringing it to the surface so he can remove it.